Battle of the Rosebud 1876, girl saves brother. A promise of gold shattered a sacred treaty and ignited one of the most significant battles in Native American history. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories, where we uncover the untold stories that shaped America. If you're fascinated by Native American history and the complex relationships that forged this nation, subscribe now and join us on this incredible journey through time. The year was 1874, when Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills of South Dakota. What he discovered would forever change the delicate peace between the United States government and the proud Sioux Nation. Gold gleaming in the streams and hills triggered a rush that would violate sacred agreements and lead to bloodshed. The Black Hills weren't just another piece of territory. They were the spiritual heart of the Sioux people, protected by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. This agreement had guaranteed the Sioux exclusive use of the land, establishing it as part of their great Sioux Reservation. The treaty's words were clear and binding. No white settlement would be permitted without the Sioux's consent. But the discovery of gold changed everything. Like a flood breaking through a dam, settlers poured into the Black Hills, disregarding both the treaty and the sacred nature of the land. The U.S. government caught between honoring its promises and responding to the settlers' demands, attempted to purchase the Black Hills from the Sioux. Their offers were met with firm refusal. For the Sioux, this was not merely land to be bought and sold, but the very foundation of their cultural and spiritual identity. As tensions mounted and diplomatic efforts failed, the stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the pages of American history. The Battle of Rosebud was about to begin, marking a crucial turning point in the struggle for the American West. The War Department's strategy to subdue the free-roaming Sioux and their allies crystallized into an ambitious, three-pronged military campaign in the summer of 1876. The plan was designed to be a decisive operation that would finally resolve what military leaders called the Indian problem, the continued resistance of Native Americans to reservation life. From Fort Fetterman in Wyoming Territory, Brigadier General George Crook would lead the southern thrust. His command was formidable. Nearly 1,000 battle-hardened men from the 2nd and 3rd Cavalry, supported by the veteran soldiers of the 4th and 9th Infantry Regiments. Fort Fetterman positioned strategically on a high bluff, overlooking the North Platte River, served as the perfect launching point for the southern advance. The fort's position allowed Crook's forces to move north through the territory where intelligence suggested large groups of Sioux and Cheyenne were gathering. The fort itself was a testament to the Army's determination. Built in 1867, it consisted of a number of permanent buildings arranged on the bluff without the traditional stockade walls. This was no frontier outpost, but a major supply depot and staging ground for military operations. Crook's preparations were meticulous. His column would carry enough supplies to operate independently for weeks, with 100 wagons and over 300 pack mules loaded with ammunition, food, and essential equipment. From the west, Colonel John Gibbon would marshal his forces along the Yellowstone River. His troops based in Montana Territory would create a blocking force, preventing any Native warriors from escaping in that direction. Gibbon's men faced some of the most challenging terrain. The route would take them through narrow valleys and across swift, running streams swollen with spring snow melt. Their path would follow the Yellowstone's course, a natural highway through the wilderness, but also a route that offered numerous ambush opportunities for any opposing force. The third and final piece of this military vice came from Fort Abraham Lincoln in Dakota Territory. General Alfred Terry would command this eastern force, with Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry Regiment serving as the spearhead. Their mission was to drive west, completing the encirclement of any hostile forces gathered near the Little Bighorn River. Terry's column was perhaps the most mobile, with Custer's cavalry giving him the ability to move quickly once Native forces were located. The timing and coordination of these movements were planned with precision that reflected the Army's Civil War experience. Each column was to begin its advance in late May, or early June timing. Their movements to coincide with the traditional gathering of native tribes for their summer buffalo hunts. The War Department believed this would be the optimal time to find and engage the scattered bands that had refused to move onto reservations. The operational plan relied heavily on several crucial assumptions about the campaign conditions. Military planners believed the native forces would be concentrated in their traditional summer hunting grounds, making them easier to locate and engage. They assumed the three columns could maintain some form of communication despite the vast distances separating them. The success of the operation depended on favorable terrain and weather conditions, permitting the planned movements. Perhaps most critically, they expected the native warriors to react predictably when pressed by military forces, moving in ways that would make them vulnerable to the coordinated advance. Each commanding officer received detailed orders that left little room for misinterpretation. Once contact was made with hostile forces, they were to attack immediately and drive the natives toward the other columns. The orders emphasized the importance of preventing any escape to the north or south, where the vast territories would make pursuit impossible. The challenges facing this ambitious plan were numerous. The territory they needed to cover was immense. Nearly 200 miles separated the eastern and western columns. Communication between forces would depend on mounted couriers who would need to traverse dangerous territory, potentially filled with hostile warriors. The spring weather was unpredictable, with sudden storms capable of turning dry creek beds into raging torrents that could delay movements for days. Moreover, the Army's intelligence about native movements and numbers was sketchy. At best, reports from Indian agents suggested that large numbers of Sioux and Cheyenne had left their reservations, but exact numbers and locations remained unknown. The Army was essentially launching a massive operation against an enemy whose strength and position they could only guess at. What seemed like a sound strategy in the war rooms of the Department of the Plan would soon face its first major test through General Crook's column. As spring turned to summer, Crook assembled one of the most diverse and well-equipped forces ever seen in frontier warfare. At the core of Crook's command were 14 companies of cavalry and 3 companies of infantry. Their ranks filled with both Civil War veterans and fresh recruits, eager to prove themselves. The cavalry, drawn from the prestigious 2nd and 3rd Regiments, would provide the mobility and striking power essential for the campaign. The infantry companies, though slower, would give the column the sustained fighting power it needed for extended engagements. The logistics of moving such a force through hostile territory required careful planning. Crook's supply train consisted of 100 wagons, each loaded with essential supplies, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment. Supporting these wagons were 320 pack mules, their handlers experienced in navigating difficult terrain while keeping their vital cargo secure. Perhaps most crucial to Crook's plans were his native allies. 180 Crow Scouts and 86 Shoshone warriors joined his column, their longtime enmity with the Sioux making them eager participants in the campaign. These warriors, led by respected chiefs, including Old Crow and Washakie, brought invaluable knowledge of the territory and enemy tactics, adding an unusual element to the expedition. Were 65 armed Montana miners, their presence a reminder of the gold fever that had helped precipitate the conflict. 5 newspaper correspondents also accompanied the column, their presence ensuring that this campaign would be thoroughly documented for readers back east. Through late May and early June, this impressive force gathered at Fort Fetterman, conducting drills and preparing for the advance north. The fort buzzed with activity as final preparations were made. Weapons were cleaned and checked, supplies were distributed, and last-minute adjustments were made to equipment. The Crow and Shoshone scouts ranged out ahead, bringing back reports of enemy movements that helped Crook refine his plans. As the column prepared to move out, even the most experienced soldiers could sense that this campaign would be different. The size and composition of the force, the scale of the supplies, and the presence of the native allies all suggested that the Army was preparing for a major confrontation. What none of them yet knew was how soon that confrontation would come, or how fiercely it would be fought. Opposing Crook's military might stood a formidable native force under the command of legendary warrior Crazy Horse. Nearly 1,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors had gathered, their ranks filled with experienced fighters who had repeatedly proven themselves in combat against the U.S. Army. Leadership of this indigenous army was shared among several respected chiefs. Crazy Horse, the brilliant Oglala Sioux tactician, held overall command through the respect he had earned in previous battles. The Cheyenne brought their own powerful leaders, the seasoned warrior Tamoon, the dynamic young Tamoon, and the respected war chief Spotted Wolf. Each commanded the absolute loyalty of their warriors. While the army may have expected to face opponents armed with traditional weapons, they would instead meet a force equipped with modern firearms. The warriors carried Winchester and Henry repeating rifles, sophisticated weapons that could fire multiple rounds without reloading. This firepower would prove crucial in the coming battle, giving them an advantage over the Army's standard-issue single-shot carbines. The first signs of the impending clash came when a Cheyenne hunting party made a startling discovery. Moving through their traditional hunting grounds, they crested a rise and found themselves staring down at an extraordinary sight. The earth itself seemed to have turned black with soldiers. Crook's massive encampment spread across the valley below, the morning sun glinting off weapons and equipment. The hunters could scarcely believe their eyes at the scale of the military force before them. Understanding the grave threat this army posed, the Cheyenne hunters raced back toward their combined Sioux and Cheyenne village on the Little Bighorn River. As they approached their camp, they announced their presence with the traditional wolf howls, a sound that immediately alerted the entire village to potential danger. The camp erupted into activity as warriors and elders gathered to discuss this alarming development. After a swift council, the decision was made. They would not wait to be attacked. Under cover of darkness, Crazy Horse led his warriors out from their camp, with Sitting Bull accompanying them to provide spiritual guidance and moral support. The warriors rode through the night, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to cover the distance rapidly. Their determination was evident in the way they pushed themselves and their horses, knowing they needed to strike before the army could fully prepare. Dawn was breaking over Rosebud Creek when Crook's Crow scouts, who had been ranging ahead of the main column, detected signs of the approaching warriors. The scouts had seen evidence of a large force moving in their direction and raced back to raise the alarm. "Hipsu, hipsu!" Their urgent cries echoed through the morning air as they galloped back into camp. The warning caught Crook's forces at their most vulnerable. The general and his officers were engaged in a casual game of cards while their men had unsaddled their horses to let them graze. The camp had settled into a deceptively peaceful morning routine when the first distant gunshots shattered the calm. Though some initially dismissed the sounds as scouts hunting buffalo, the intensity and direction of the fire quickly dispelled this assumption. In those crucial moments, the army scrambled to prepare for battle. Men rushed to retrieve their grazing horses. Officers shouted orders through the confusion, and soldiers hastily formed into defensive positions. The Crow and Shoshone scouts, already stripped for battle and their bodies painted for war, bought precious time for the army to organize, engaging the advancing warriors in the first exchanges of fire. The morning air filled with war cries and the thunder of hoofs as nearly 1,000 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors appeared on the surrounding ridges, their weapons gleaming in the early sunlight. The Battle of the Rosebud was about to begin in earnest. The battle's decisive moment unfolded at what would become known as Royal's Ridge. Colonel Royal, serving as second in command to Crook, had recognized that numerous warriors were massing on his flank in an attempt to overwhelm the infantry. Acting decisively, he moved his forces south and west across the ridges and ravines with Captains Guy Henry William Andrews, Charles Meinhold, and Peter Vroom, clearing successive positions of encroaching Lakota warriors. The maneuver, though tactically sound, led Royal's men deeper into peril. His forces crossed the ravine of Colmar Creek and seized the high ground to the southwest, the position that would soon bear his name. What began as an aggressive advance quickly transformed into a desperate defensive action, as Crazy Horse, displaying his tactical brilliance, seized the opportunity to isolate Royals' command from the main force. The numbers told the grim story of their predicament. Royals' force, initially comprising 4 companies of about 40 men, each had been severely depleted. Combat casualties, mounted men, were detailed to evacuate the wounded, and every 4th soldier was occupied holding horses in the rear. Their effective fighting strength had dwindled to barely 70 men. Against them, an overwhelming force of approximately 700 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors pressed their advantage from 3 directions. The intensity of combat reached unprecedented levels. The repeating rifles used by the warriors created what survivors described as one continuous volley. Civil War veterans among the troops declared they had never witnessed such ferocious fighting. As one officer grimly remarked to another, "Better die right here than back in the ravine." A soldier checking his ammunition observed to his comrade, "It's only a question of cartridges." The crisis reached its peak when the Sioux, massing their full strength, launched a massive charge against both the right flank and front of Royals' position. The battlefield erupted with war cries of "Yip Hip Heya, Heya," as warriors urged their ponies forward at full gallop. For a crucial moment, it appeared Royals' entire command would be overwhelmed. In this desperate hour, leadership proved crucial. Officers dashed forward to rally their men. Sergeant Henry's voice rang out above the chaos. "Face them, men! Face them!" Other officers, appealing to unit pride, shouted, "Great God, men! Don't go back on the old third." Their combined efforts raised a cheer from the beleaguered troops, who turned to face their attackers at point-blank range. So close they almost burned the noses of their ponies. They delivered a devastating volley that drove the warriors back nearly 200 yards. During this intense fighting, Captain Henry was severely wounded, a bullet tearing through his face from cheekbone to cheekbone. As he lay exposed to enemy fire, it seemed certain he would fall into enemy hands. At this critical moment, Chief Washakie, the 70-year-old Shoshone leader, proved his worth as an ally. Despite his age, Washakie led a desperate countercharge that drove back the warriors, closing in on Henry's position. The valiant stand on Royals Ridge, supported by the Crow and Shoshone allies, and long-range fire from Crook's Hill, finally enabled Royals' command to begin their fighting withdrawal. Not all would make it. A handful of stragglers were cut down, with one soldier's surrender being answered with a tomahawk blow. But through the combined efforts of regular troops and native allies, the majority of Royals' men managed to cross Colmar Creek and rejoin the main command, bringing an end to what many considered the most intense combat of the entire Indian Wars. Amid the chaos of battle, an act of extraordinary courage would give this clash its enduring name. Among the Cheyenne people, a Cheyenne warrior named Comes in Sight boldly charged up a valley known as the Gap, directly challenging infantry soldiers positioned on higher ground. His daring assault ended abruptly when enemy fire struck his horse, leaving him stranded and pinned down under withering fire from the western ridges. Other Cheyenne warriors watched in horror as their companion faced certain death. Then a lone rider plunged down the steep hillside. The warriors circled through heavy fire, reached Comes in Sight, and pulled him onto their horse in a masterful display of horsemanship. As they galloped to safety through the northern Cheyenne battle line, the identity of the rescuer became clear. It was Buffalo Calf Road woman, Comes in Sight's own sister. Her extraordinary bravery led the Cheyenne to forever remember this engagement as the battle where the girl saved her brother. The native warriors demonstrated sophisticated battle tactics throughout the engagement. Most striking was their method of mounted warfare. They would charge toward the soldiers' lines, hanging from one side of their horses, using the animals' bodies as shields while firing or launching arrows from underneath their horses' necks. This technique not only protected the warriors, but also made them incredibly difficult targets for the soldiers to hit effectively. The maneuver required exceptional horsemanship and years of practice, skills that gave them a decisive advantage. In mounted combat, the Crow and Shoshone scouts proved invaluable to Crook's forces throughout the battle. When the initial attack came, these experienced warriors bought precious time for the surprise soldiers to organize their defense. Their intimate knowledge of Sioux and Cheyenne tactics helped them anticipate enemy movements, while their skilled horsemen repeatedly countercharged to break up attacks threatening to overwhelm army positions. The scouts demonstrated their loyalty and courage, most notably during the crisis at Royals Ridge, where their timely interventions helped prevent the complete encirclement of the isolated command. On June 17, 1876, the Battle of the Rosebud drew to a close, leaving both sides to count their losses. The exact toll of the battle remained disputed, with varying accounts from different sources. Official Army reports claim 9 soldiers killed and 23 wounded, though Scout Frank Groward's account painted a grimmer picture: 28 dead and 56 wounded. Among the native allies, 1 scout had fallen and 7 others suffered wounds. On the opposing side, Crazy Horse later acknowledged 36 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors lost, with 63 bearing wounds from the day's fighting. Though General Crook technically held the battlefield at day's end, the battle's strategic impact told a different story. What began as a confident advance toward the Little Bighorn River had transformed into a significant setback for the Army's campaign. Crook's force, depleted of ammunition and burdened with wounded, had no choice but to withdraw south to their camp on Goose Creek, near present-day Sheridan, Wyoming. There they would remain for 7 critical weeks, awaiting reinforcements and supplies. The Crow and Shoshone scouts, sensing the campaign's momentum had shifted, departed shortly after the battle. The consequences of this withdrawal would echo far beyond the Rosebud battlefield. Crook's retreat effectively destroyed the Army's carefully planned, 3-pronged strategy unknown to him. He had been merely 30 miles from General Terry's column, which included Custer's 7th Cavalry. His inability to continue north left a crucial gap in the Army's coordinated advance. 8 days later, these same Sioux and Cheyenne warriors who had fought at Rosebud would meet Custer's forces at the Little Bighorn. Perhaps most significantly, the Battle of the Rosebud profoundly impacted the native warriors' confidence and tactical approach. Their success against one of the Army's most experienced Indian fighters demonstrated the effectiveness of their strategies and unified resistance. Crazy Horse's leadership had proven decisive, and his warriors' ability to force a superior military force to retreat boosted their morale immensely. Rather than waiting defensively at Little Bighorn, they would approach that battle with aggressive confidence, a shift in mindset that would contribute to one of the most famous victories in Native American military history. The Battle of the Rosebud stands as the largest single engagement of the Great Sioux War of 1876, yet its significance extends far beyond mere numbers. The battle shattered the U.S. Army's assumptions about native fighting capabilities. Crazy Horse and his warriors demonstrated sophisticated tactics, superior weapons handling, and strategic brilliance that forced military leaders to radically rethink their approach to frontier warfare. The battle's impact rippled through government policy. The stunning display of native military prowess challenged long-held beliefs about the inevitability of tribal submission. Two reservation life military planners could no longer dismiss indigenous resistance as merely temporary obstacles to manifest destiny. Among the Cheyenne people, the battle holds special significance under another name: the battle where the girl saved her brother. This name preserves the memory of Buffalo Calf Road woman's extraordinary courage, a reminder that bravery knows no gender, and that the fight to protect one's way of life involved entire communities, not just warriors. The Battle of the Rosebud changed the course of American history. 8 days later, many of these same warriors would achieve an even more famous victory at Little Bighorn in those summer days of 1876. The combined strength of the Sioux and Cheyenne nations showed the world the true power of their fighting spirit. If you're passionate about Native American history and the stories that shaped our nation, subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories. Join our community and discover the untold stories of America's past. Subscribe now and never miss an episode.